I just recently finished this quilt. I did the machine quilting on my treadle machine, and I like the overall look, but I thought it might stand out even better if I added trapunto to the snowflake. And that's a technique I usually use when I do hand quilting, but I don't see why it wouldn't work on this. So I'm gonna get some materials together and show you how to get that unquilted area stuffed so that it stands out more. So I'll be right back. So, to show you what I'm up to here, the areas that I didn't quilt is actually what made the design here, and it left the fabric a little slack, and it doesn't stand out as much as I'd like. Now, what a lot of machine quilters will do is they'll use 2 layers of batting, maybe something heavy and denser like a warm and natural as the back, and then another layer on top of that, something like maybe wool or polyester that's light but has a loft to it, and that helps to create the dimension. Well, I didn't do that. And when I do a hand quilting, what I'll often do at the end is go back after all the quilting is done and add trapunto into those spaces, filling that up. And that's what I'm going to do on this. Now, I normally use roving yarn, and this is one that I'm using for a different quilt. I went to the store and couldn't find any more of that. And I'm saving this for the other quilt, so I don't want to use that. So what I ended up with is kind of just a big chunky yarn, and that is Big Twist Natural Blend. It is super bulky number 6. Acrylic and wool blend. So that's what I'm going to use. And in order to get it in there, I use a giant needle. These are, it's a package of upholstery needles, and they're really big. I'm going to use the 6-inch needle. Let me get that out. So that's a pretty substantial needle. We'll see if I can get it to work. I might need the next size up. And the way this works is you're going to take a length of yarn, thread your needle, and maybe the hardest part here is threading the needle, because even with a needle this big, the yarn's pretty thick, so you gotta work it on there. I like to do it with a double thickness of yarn, so I get 2 strands to go through at once. So I'm gonna even it out there, so I've got a double thickness of yarn. Now I'm going to insert the yarn in between the layers, and that will add fullness because of the bulk of the yarn. It'll fill up that space. Now, the top is made. It's a hand dyed fabric, but it's like a batik. The weave is that. It's got that hand to it. It's very thin threads, tightly woven. So it's probably better not to do this from the front. I'm going to do it from the back. Now, here's the back. Back on this quilt is really pretty too. But anyway, so the way this works is I'm going to take the needle and I'm going to go in to the quilt. Now I'm not going through all the way, I'm just going between the layers, and I'm going to thread that needle through. And again, you're going to want to try to be sure that you're not going through all of it, you're just going through between the layers. And so there's this where I've got a big section of the needle through, and you can see on the other side it doesn't come through. Then you're going to pull it through, and this is not a it doesn't just go through super easily. It takes a little bit of force to get those pieces of yarn to go through. And you're going to pull it till it just goes back into the hole, and then up at the other end, be careful not to cut your fabric, but cut it pretty close. Now you can see where that maybe you can see that little bit of yarn that's still showing. If I give this a little tug, that buries itself back in, and then you do it again and again until the area gets filled up. Now people will say, oh, but what about the holes you're making in the fabric? They close back up. It's not a big deal. If they don't close up right away, a little spritz with some water and a little movement with your fingers across it will usually take care of that. Or what I do is I just throw it in a wash, and the holes just disappear. You're not actually tearing the fabric or making any giant holes. You're just, separating the threads. So it's not, for me, it's not a big deal. They'll close right back up. And the needle that you use, it's helpful if it's a good sized needle, because you can get longer sections of this done with a longer needle. In a smaller needle, with a smaller needle, you may only be able to, you'll only be able to fill up the length of the needle. So I like to use a big one. It'll feel really weird at first. You'll feel like you're causing damage. You're not. So as you start getting the yarn stuffed in there, you should be able to start to see the area filling in. Now I got a little tail that needs to go in from that last piece. I didn't cut it close enough, so I'm using the point of the needle to try and get on there it goes. Now it's buried. So then you, as you're filling it, you're going to kind of rub the pieces, and that kind of helps to settle them in there and keep them flat. They're not going anywhere. They're encased in this fabric. So I've had people say, well, how do you keep the yarn in place? Won't it just all ball up? It doesn't. I've done quilts like this numerous times, and if you get it in there good, you can wash the quilt, and the Trapunto bits do not migrate. As long as you've got it sufficiently filled, it's good and sturdy. So this is one of the many different traditional ways to do trapunto. What another way they often would do it is, and it would take the patience of a saint, I think, so I've never tried it. But they would actually, with a needle, they would go in and start separating the threads, you know, sliding them over, and gradually work those around so that there's actually an opening in the fabric. You haven't broken any threads, but you've made them separate. And then they would take little bits of batting and stuff it in there and work it around, and then after they were all done, then they would tease those threads back into place. That's more patience than I would ever have. This takes a little bit of time, but it's not, you know, it's not anything that's going to drive you crazy. It does take a lot of yarn. In one quilt that I did, I used 12 skeins to fill up all the quilting, and it made for a pretty quilt. It also made a heavy quilt. So you may or may not want to put in that much. Depends on the overall look you want. If you have smaller areas to fill, it'll certainly go a lot faster. So my little scissors here are pretty dull, so I'm having a hard time even cutting the yarn with them. Okay, I don't know if that you can see what I've got done there, but if you look at it on the other side, can you see how that added a fullness to that? That when you know, you can see I've done that section, and do you see the difference in the loft here? So it's going to make the whole thing have more definition. You can stuff this as tight or loose as you think is going to work for you. I'm finding, just by looking at that little section, I'm going to want to do quite a bit of stuffing to make this really smooth. So other thing, about this particular quilt, this backing fabric that I used was just something I had in my pile that is not quilting weight fabric. It's a garment type fabric from, I don't know when. It came out of the sewing stash of a friend who ended up having to move into assisted living, and so I took all of her fabric and promised to give it a good use. Well, I don't sew clothes, but who's to say that old clothing fabric can't make decent quilting fabric? So anyway, that's where I use this on the back. It's a much coarser weave than what a normal quilter's cotton would be, but it doesn't matter. This could be done with really any backing fabric. My most normal backing fabric for hand quilting is usually just a good quality muslin, and this technique works great on that. I did one where I did the backing with a batik fabric, and the Trapunto came out fine in that. I was a little concerned about how easily the needle would pull through on such a tightly woven fabric, but it worked out. So you get the idea. It's just a series of inserting the pieces into the backing, then working them around, kind of scrunch them between your fingers and make sure you've got the spaces full where you want them to be, and then periodically you're going to want to turn it over and look at it from the front, because that's where you're going to really be able to tell how you're making out. So again, let's put one more piece here, and then we'll go back and look at the front again. So I'm now through most of that, and I'm down to about here. So I don't know if you can really see yet the difference. It'll start to show more when I get more of it done, and when I get a bigger section done, I'll come back and show you the difference that you'll be able to see from one section to the next. But that's basically how you do it, or how I'm doing it. Like I said, there's a bunch of different ways that trapunto can happen, but this is a way to do it after the quilting is done. If you decide that you need some more definition, this is a way to do it. So back in a bit. Not sure that the last section you could really see what I was doing. I can't see what my camera is picking up, because it's facing the wrong direction. Anyway, I hope you can see. I'm going to do a little bit again close up. So the big needle pulls the yarn through. I'm doing it doubled up because I have a lot of space to fill. If you have smaller areas, you certainly could use less. You wouldn't need two strands. For example, if you see these little lines here, if I wanted to fill that in, I would do it with one strand. So that gets pulled between the layers, and trim it off, and I'll just keep going. So hopefully that'll show on the camera, and you'll be able to see how I'm doing that. It's just a matter of lots of pulling through of, in this case, yarn. The yarn that you choose will be really dependent on how big the spaces you've got to fill up are. I think big, puffy, full yarn is the way to go, because it takes less of it, or less times to, put the needle through and through and through. So use the really, essentially, I think the biggest size yarn that you can get to fill up the space. And not a bad idea to use some yarn that is washable and that won't shrink. The choices are many if you go to the yarn store or the craft store. One other thing I should note, there's a technique that's called shadow trapunto, where stuffing that goes into the quilt is actually done in a different color. So if you had a light colored quilt top, let's say white, and you used dark blue thread, the yarn, dark blue yarn, the yarn would shadow through. You'd see it in the through the top, so you'd get more of a light blue look in the stuffed areas. I haven't done that method myself because my tops are usually not all white, or I want the it's not a look that I've wanted to do so far, but I do have one that I'm planning on doing that with. At some point I'll show you that, where you use a darker yarn and the color shadows through. Anyway, hopefully that's going to show up better. And again, part of the mission here is rubbing and smoothing those pieces of yarn so that they're smoothly in there. But I don't know if you can see the extra dimension that has happened there. So that's how that works. I'm not sure if that's going to show up really well, but that section right there in the middle is one that I have completed the filling on. So there's one that's got stuffing in it and one that doesn't. It's going to take a while. Let me move back a bit. Anyway, I think you can get the overall effect of how much that's going to make the quilting stand out. So I'm going to get back to work stuffing, and a little bit later I'll show you a completed quilt.